Many times policy can only change so many things. For example, I think there are certain ministers that are quite capable, but they speak like not so polished, not so eloquent. And then the people will say stuff like, you'll be very lousy if you represent Singapore. Then other people, maybe they're very eloquent, but they are from branded school. Society has to realize like, okay, not everyone from eloquent from branded school means you are capable.
Hey guys, welcome to the Are We OK podcast, the podcast that talks about public policies in ways that are accessible to you, the man and the woman on the street, in the shopping mall, and wherever we may encounter you. On the show today, I'm Dr. OKM or Botak Man, and we have
Mr. Money, Peter.
And here we have our special guest.
Yeah, hi, my name is Rui Ming. I'm from this page called like the Woke Salaryman. We are like personal finance blog in Singapore.
Before we go on, you may see that the studio looks a little bit different. The colors are a little bit darker. Peter, why the change in the color of the studio?
So if you notice that it's not just the change in the studio, but rather change in the coffee cup as well. Yeah. So to tie into the mood of the new product at Zeus, which is actually SOE, Single Origin Espresso. So supposedly it's more premium with just RM1 extra.
Premium beans from
premium
Colombia.
Bean from Colombia. So if those of you who actually enjoy a more premium coffee, now there's an option there in Zeus.
Where coffee is a necessity.
So this is a SOE CEO latte. Go and check it out.
Thanks for your support, Zeus Coffee. Before we ask you to maybe introduce yourself a little bit more and also what is Woke Salaryman, maybe we start off on something a lot of people are talking about, the woke concept. You know, so when people say woke, you know, it's like, oh, you cannot use certain words, you have to use proper pronouns, this and that. And I get a sense that there's been a little bit of, you know, backlash, especially in the West, against woke. So my question to you, since your website, your value proposition is called Woke Salaryman, do you think woke is still a relevant concept?
Wow, I think that's such a good question, but thanks for asking it. I think like, first of all, right, I think the meaning of the word woke, right, was actually, the context is actually Singaporean. So I first heard the word woke when I was doing NS, National Service in Singapore, where like my sergeant major, which is like an older military professional, said to me like, hey Rui Ming, I wish I woke up earlier. And that's the context that we have always used the word woke. When we started the blog in 2019, I think like there was some woke in the Western sense meant like, you know, to be socially aware of stuff. There was like a nice synergy between what our woke means and what their woke means. In recent years, you know, the word woke has been used like very pejoratively, especially by the conservative right.
In the United States.
Yeah, in the United States. My perspective is like, we are free to use the English language, you know, as how we want. So I think we try to avoid like the more Western-centric point of view, because as an Asian page, we also try to promote like Asian perspectives. So for the time being, we are ignoring like the Western side. I mean, we don't really care what they say for now, because I think we should tell our own stories, assign our own meanings to the specific words.
And that's consistent with the other part of your name, the salaryman, because that's also Asian in nature, in the sense that it comes from Japan, the salaryman.
Exactly.
Right.
Salaryman.
So when you combine the two, what is the meaning or the ethos of the woke salaryman?
Wow, I think it's someone who, you know, maybe it's just like a regular person in society who has kind of seen past like, you know, capitalism, seen past like the rat race, and kind of like found like balance in this like quite crazy world that we live in right now.
Balance like in a very Zen kind of way, or balance like in a very Singaporean.
Wow, I think closer to the Zen sort of way is to accept, you know, like, oh, this is the system we're born into. Here's what I need to do, and here's what I can do to thrive.
As opposed to Singapore would be like that lor.
Yeah, I think like
Mr. Brown like that lor.
Wow. Okay, I cannot comment on Mr. Brown, although great fan, I used to listen to him back in the day. I think like for woke salary men or women or people, right, resignation or like desperation is always not an option. It's always about deciding like what to do after understanding like the facts.
Do you think like in the Malaysian context, if we say woke salaryman or woman, what do you think people would think of?
I think in Malaysia, we kind of subscribe to the more Asian version of woke, where it's more towards like the beginning times when they first talked about it in the US and so. It was more woke as in like breaking away from the traditional way of looking at life. That was the original definition, I remember. Only very much later it became more pronouns and this and that. Yeah, I think I agree with him on that part. So when I think about Woke Salaryman was also when the first time they came out with that page, I just started Mr. Money. It was about the same time. I was like, oh, this is a great comic strip, right? Really carries the exact same value that I want to share in Malaysia. Yeah, just that I do in the video format, they do in a comic format.
Yeah, but I think that being said, of course, if in the future, in the Asian context, woke does warp into something that we don't agree in, then, we are always open to change the name. We are not like super tied to it as well.
So it can be like a woken or a wake up salaryman.
Yeah, possibly. So like the original term that you say in a Singapore context, right, is like, hey, you better wake up your idea, right? So yeah, I think that's the original term. Then,
I think it should be fine because the fact that it's already tied into the word salaryman, right? So it already gives that context of what this woke is about.
Yeah, so actually, for our Malaysian viewers, I'm relatively familiar with this concept in the Singaporean context because friends who were in the military, they will always tell me, or I hear them tell other Singaporeans, hey, wake up your ideas. That's a phrase that we don't really hear much of in Malaysia.
Yeah.
Right? You want to explain that concept? Hey, what do you mean by, hey,
yeah,
wake up your ideas?
So for example, like, your superior officer gives you like off days, every weekend, right? But actually it's a privilege, it's not a right. So if someone assumes that, they should be entitled to the right, the superior officer, hey, you better wake up your idea. Do you think this is a right? This is a privilege I've extended to you. So this is like a 造句 I've constructed a sentence using the word, wake up your idea.
Would there also be some Hokkien foul language?
Of course. But maybe not suitable for this podcast. Yeah. Maybe not in line with our branding.
Okay. So wake up your idea is kind of like, hey, you wake up lah, like kind of like, wake up lah.
Yeah, exactly. It's like a rude slap to the face. Right? Because I think for us, like, our brand tries to be a good friend, and sometimes a good friend tells you things that you don't want to hear.
Right.
So
honest truth.
Yeah, so you wake up your idea.
So it's like, wake up lah.
Yes.
Was that the genesis of your communications via comic strips and also later on the Instagram posts and all that? The idea of using an easy way to communicate to people in Singapore?
Yeah, I think, so for context, I used to work in advertising, right? In the creative field. And I think the thing I'll find about creative people is that they don't have a capacity for long form reading, at least in the advertising industry. So I'll show my friends like many good resources. Like for example, everyone says like Benjamin Graham will write like the Intelligent Investor, stuff like Motley Fool, right? I'll show them like these pages and they say like, oh, Rui Ming, I just can't read this. I just can't. Then I'm like, you need to read this. If not, you'll never get your finances in order. And they're like, I don't care. I'd rather just buy sneakers.
Too hard work. Too much hard work.
I don't care. It's too much effort for me. So I thought, what if we could drop the bar for like the barrier entry like really, really low, that it's really accessible. And I think that's how we tried to start with
entry level.
So we think ourselves as like maybe the kindergarten or primary school or personal finance. So you can read our stuff first, and then you can progress on to bigger and larger things. We're just happy for you if you do that.
And was that what attracted you to their product?
Yes. During that same time, I started Mr. Money, started Woke Salaryman, and we thought it was really amazing that they can put everything into a comic strip, and it was so easy to understand, so relatable. And the interesting part is that it almost felt like they were Malaysian at the start. Yeah, I don't know whether it's because Singapore culture is also quite similar,
Well,
right?
your co-founder is...
Yeah, my co-founder comes from Johor. He's called Goh Wei Chun.
Yes, that's
Great
right.
guy, right? So, this is a bilateral effort, right? So,
yeah, actually, now to think about it, it's quite a fantastic
combination.
combination, right?
Yeah. Johor, Singapore, SEZ,
That's
Special
right,
Economic
that's right.
Zone.
Yeah, maybe I should send a CK to Singapore, migrate him there.
Send him there to learn a bit, then come back and
Yeah.
So any stories that you can share with us in terms of some of the impact that you had initially to people in Singapore, and then they came back to you and say, hey, actually your advice helped me in X, Y, and Z way.
So I think we were very lucky. So our first post, which is called like how to save 100k before 30, I think went super viral. Like it had like 7k shares from like the very start. I think like right off the bat, like 1 week into running a page, we had like I think close to 10k followers. In the beginning of running a page, I would like DM everyone, right? I would literally reply every single message. And remember, there was this guy who actually texted me like, because after reading our content, he managed to cut off his gambling addiction. Yeah, and recently because we were at the KL Comic and Arts Fair recently, a Malaysian lady came up and said like, we literally like changed her opinion of finances. She used to buy a lot of like luxury bags after graduating, and because of that, she changed her mind to be less materialistic. I guess it's times like this we feel like, wow, this is like an amazing job to be in. You can earn okay money, right? You can do a job that is meaningful, and of course, like I mean, we're pretty good at it, and we enjoy the work.
And you can help people.
Yeah, exactly.
Does that jive with what you are trying to do in Mr. Money as well?
Yeah, actually, it's the same thing. I mean, being online is one of a very difficult thing. You as a ex-politician yourself, you feel it. No matter what you do, sometimes there's always haters, right?
Yes.
Yeah, but I guess sometimes what makes the difference is when people come up and they really thank you for the message that you've given, what they've benefited from. And I guess for me, the same motto, right? Some people will say that, hey, maybe Mr. Money, you are sharing things that are too basic. Why don't you go deeper? There are also people who tell you like, hey, why don't you share things that are more basic? But the point is, as long as my content goes out and one person or 3 person's life get benefited, I feel like it's worth it.
Yeah, in a way, it's a privilege to have such a public position. Because in the beginning, when I started Woke Salaryman, I remember like when I expressed like opinion, people will always challenge it.
Oh.
And through my opinion being challenged, I actually learned. So I learned so much from like running this page. In the beginning, I started off from like just a salaryman point of view, right? I started from the employee point of view. And I think in the beginning, I was like, well, employers at fault, why doesn't government legislate this? But over time, I have begun to like learn like the other perspectives. And I think that is such a privilege that I think not everyone gets to have. And I feel like just having this perspective of like, the business perspective, the personal perspective, the government perspective, like you already understand so much more than like the rest of society. And whenever I hear like a complex issue, like I'm able to analyze it from all points of view. I think that is something that more people should have, because if you don't understand the world around you, you will be very disillusioned and very bitter with it.
And maybe a little bit too one-track minded.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. So wear different hats, look at different things from different points of view.
In ancient times, right, like when there was like a natural disaster or like there's a flood, people will like blame the gods. Like, this misfortune happened to me. Then they will like shake their fist at the heavens, right? But actually they didn't do anything to improve their situation. I think if you don't understand how the world works or how the system we live in works in that manner, you kind of are like an ancient person. You direct your energies to the wrong things that actually don't really help your position.
That's true.
So I think the first step is understanding first, then you can decide what to do from there.
So on that point, in terms of these kinds of things that are beyond our control happening to us, how did your outreach, how did your content, how did your business get affected during COVID?
Wow, actually during COVID was quite an interesting time for us, because a lot of people suddenly became very interested in personal finance. But I think what we found out is that because we try to talk about principles and like nothing too productish, we never like give stock tips or whatever. We would literally be the primary school of personal finance. So people will read us for maybe like 6 months, then they will discover some trader or whatever offering them get a rich quick scheme. Then they would try that, and then when it all came to shit, they came back to us. Because ultimately I think the principles are more important than trying to get shortcuts, which is what a lot of people were doing that period. So I think we did grow quite a bit during COVID, also because we were like an early first mover within this space. Before that, like I think very few people were using personal finance, using comics to talk about personal finance, or as well as like understanding like the macro environment. We actually benefited from COVID, and I feel a bit guilty saying that because I know it was a tough time for a lot of people. But I think we're also glad that we were able to be there and give like rational advice to people who were might be irrational during that period.
Sure. Actually, Rui Ming talks about rational advice during irrational times. I remember when we first met each other, this was during a time when they had the Bitcoin or crypto crash. Right. So there were, you were mentioning to me that there were people who, lost their savings. Some even wanted to end their own lives, take their own lives and things like that. And I remember you telling me that you came out with some content to sort of like give these people encouragement. You want to say a bit more about that?
Well, I think this was after the coin Luna. I think the value fell to zero. So I think a lot of people were quite badly hit, especially those in the bleeding edge of investments. I personally invested, I think like 5 to 10% of my net worth in it. I also lost some money. So we put out a piece saying that, yes, it is very tough to lose a lot of money at the time. But remember, like for a young person, you still have like a long way ahead of you. And most of your capital will actually come from income, not through wild speculative trades. And if you wanted to learn a lesson about losing money quickly, it's best to learn it when you're younger. Yeah,
that's right.
Not when like you're 60 years old, you try to bet your EPF or your CPF money to try to be a millionaire, and then it all goes to nothing.
Or you get scammed.
Yeah, that's right.
Which is very common nowadays.
Yeah.
And any sort of like stories in that sort of like scam space that you want to share with us, that you've encountered people and all that?
Yeah, I think a lot of people think that scams only target like older people, but I think the stats actually show that younger people nowadays are actually more susceptible to scams, mostly because they are online. The older folks are not online, and then young people, we have this like illusion of vulnerability. Like, I'm so young, I'm so savvy, like I actually won't get scammed. But we do see, younger people when faced with, let's say, moments of fear and greed. For example, you want to get a Taylor Swift concert. Someone might say, if you download like this third-party app, not on Google Play or Apple Store, you can get this ticket at like a cheaper price. Yeah. They sign in, then there's some backdoor, they take all your money. So stuff like that has happened. Actually, I think Singapore lost over like $600 million to scams last year, and the number is only increasing.
Yes.
Because per dollar, it makes sense to scam us.
There's a lot of love scam in Singapore, if I'm not wrong also.
And also Sing dollar.
Yeah, Sing dollar. That's right.
Yeah.
Take a break here, and then we'll come back and ask you about the larger Singapore context of, in terms of the pressures that the young people these days are faced. So we'll be right back after this. Hey guys, welcome back to the Are We Okay podcast, and today we have a special guest with us, Rui Ming, the co-founder of Woke Salaryman, Singapore-based Instagram, social media powerhouse to go out there to educate people in Singapore and increasingly the rest of Southeast Asia and even Asia Pacific and maybe even the world.
Yeah.
On issues of personal finance.
That's right.
And using a very interesting media through comic strips to do that kind of education. So maybe let's turn to maybe slightly deeper conversation on the kind of changing societal trends in Singapore. And I think one thing that you emphasize quite a bit is telling people that, look, you have a choice in terms of not throwing your mind, body and soul into the rat race that is Singapore life. And I'm relatively familiar with that system, having studied there for my high school. Was that something personal to you? That you also wanted to sort of like not get into the rat race, and that's what inspired you to take this path?
In the beginning, my financial journey was informed by like my mom having a stroke in 2014. It's like the really jialat kind of, right? The kind that you don't really recover from. When that happened, I actually pursued like financial freedom, almost like single-mindedly. I just squashed everything behind, just pursue money first so that I could provide for my family. Somewhere along the line, that changed. I actually tried to realize like, if I put money first all the time, like that's not sustainable. So for context, in the first 3 years of my financial journey, I would do stuff like, I'll boil chicken and spinach and eat that for lunch. I'll try to take like the 7:30 train to save 50 cents every day on public transport. And eventually I cycled to work to save money, but over time I started to enjoy it. In the beginning, I thought like money would solve like a lot of the problems. Indeed, like money does solve like a lot of problems, but up to a certain level. After some point, there's like diminishing returns. Money can solve problems like, what food is there to eat, what house I want to buy, but it cannot solve stuff like, why am I so stressed all the time?
Are you happy with life?
Yeah, I'm happy with life. Do I have good relationship with my parents?
Do you have enough time to spend with the people that you care about?
Exactly. So I'm not saying money not important. Maybe like money is important. I anyhow whack, I just come up with a number, maybe up to like the 500k mark in Sing dollars. But beyond that, it's also a realization of, a lot of it is psychological. Yeah, and over time I found like the more you spend, the more harder is it to come up from the rat race. And that's the trap that I think modern day society, many of us have fallen into because of like social media, because of like, I would say, spending that companies have normalized over the past 10 years, right? Like for years, we would take Grab and we would say, oh, so cheap, this is normal. But then when the time came, interest rates went up, reversion to the mean, Grab prices became the same as taxi prices, which is like what is supposed to be in the first place. People felt a pinch, people felt like, oh, why suddenly so expensive? I feel like that is tied to the rat race also, because we've been conditioned to spend a certain amount. Many people have been conditioned to spend like 5-6k on a luxury bag after they graduate from school.
And that's normal.
Yeah, and that's normal. So in some weird way, to be prudent in this day and age, you are actually the minority.
Oh, okay. So it's a bit like in Korea, or after I graduate, I go and
do surgery, plastic surgery. Yeah, but that is almost for some is a necessity. Because if not, you can't get a job for some of them lah. Or it kind of does. It does determine their pay scale to a certain extent.
Of course.
Yeah. But having said that, like, is there any specific incident that happened in your life that made you have this like, hey, maybe I need to change the way I think.
Wrong priorities.
Yeah. Was there like a specific incident that
So
kind of like?
I think a lot of it started when I started cycling to work. Right, I started cycling because most Singaporeans aspire to own a car at some point. Right, they aspire to throw 6 digits at the car. And then
that's only for the COE, the certificate of
and have the value fall to 0 over 10 years. I mean, it's a common aspiration. So when I started cycling to work, I think it forced me to think about like, well, actually, do I really need a car? Is the Singaporean dream really worth pursuing? Right. Recently, I spoke to my friend, like asked him like, hey, you need a car? I said, yes, because he said, I need to send my kid to school. And I said, why you need to send your kid to school? And he said, oh, because around the school is very dangerous. So I said, why is it dangerous? Then he said, oh, got a lot of cars there. And then I asked him like, oh, why do you think a lot of cars there? Oh, because a lot of parents sending their kids to school. So in a way, like it was stuff like that, little moments like that made me realize like, oh, actually we might be doing something wrong. The endless pursuit of wealth does indeed make us unhappy. And over the years, I mean, now that I've achieved like financial freedom, I do think like, actually some of the best things about financial freedom isn't that like, I can buy like some new fancy car, or like I buy a nice house, or I rent like a Lambo to feel good about myself. Is that, I have time to spend with my family, I can work in a job that I like.
And you can cycle to
Yeah,
work.
exactly. I can still cycle
Yeah.
to work. So I think a lot of it was reimagining the narratives told to us like at a young age often by the previous generation who was very, very caught up in the rat race.
One of the crazy things that I did when I was studying in Singapore was I tried running to school.
Oh, wow.
And it was that time considered quite far. It was a 7-kilometer run from Bukit Timah to Bishan.
Oh,
because
quite
I
far.
was studying in
Quite
Bishan.
far, quite far.
Yeah, so my classmates thought I was a bit crazy lah, but that allowed me to get fitter and it encouraged me to do more exercise, which I still do today. So
Right.
sometimes doing this kind of zany things can have long-term positive consequences as long as you don't get knocked down by a car. lah.
Yes,
Right. Yeah, no wonder you still run today.
Correct.
Luckily, you were running in Singapore.
Yeah,
Malaysia,
Singapore.
you probably get knocked down by a car.
So going back to this sort of like changing of attitudes, right? Do you find that there are more young people or even people, in their mid-careers in Singapore who are voting with their lifestyle choices and saying that, look, I want to get out of this rat race.
Yeah.
Do you find that to be the
Well,
case?
I can't say like it's a broad trend, but I mean anecdotally, I have heard a lot of people like who are becoming more like conscious. Some of it like they started from like caring for the environment first, then they realized, oh, actually, if I care for the environment, I will also somehow spend less money. I mean, there are many entryways into this whole anti-consumerism journey that people make lah. But I think at the same time, because of technology and social media, I think it has created like extremities. There are people who are very, very conscious about they spend. There are also people who always spend to keep up with like the latest trends.
Conspicuous consumption.
Exactly.
And then
Like,
you put it on social media.
yeah, they spend to prove something to other people. I think that is also happening like in huge amounts. I mean,
Go to
like,
your Michelin
Yeah.
star restaurant, go and Instagram here and there.
so I mean, social media is like a force multiplier. It's like the super soldier serum. Yeah,
okay,
if you are good, it make you good. If you bad,
Yeah.
you'll make it damn jialat.
I was thinking of myself, right? In Singapore, how different is it from Malaysia, right? Because when I went to Singapore, this is one thing I do notice. Most of the fresh grad there, after about 1 year working, if they work in a bank, generally they'll buy a Rolex. Because it's also rather affordable in their terms. Because you're
Rolex
talking
or
about like
Tag Heuer.
Rolex.
Rolex is a bit too
Rolex.
old.
Because it's only about 5,000 Sing dollar. So if you work in the bank, I use one lah. You're talking about 5,000 Sing dollar, right? But if you're in Malaysia, it's a whole different case lah. You're talking about 20, 30K, right? So Malaysia, yes, there are also a lot of people who want to like show off on social media. I don't think it's different from anywhere in the world.
Then Malaysia,
But-
what do the kids buy? What do the fresh graduates buy after 1 year of work?
I think Malaysia generally after come out, graduate,
Down payment for the car.
Down payment for a car. Like I've heard a lot of fresh grad telling me, right? Like, buy my Via. At least must buy the most advanced one because car I'm gonna use long term. For all I know, after 6 years, they tell me that they need to change to another Vios. I mean, I used to fall into the same trap. Then, but it's just that I'm thinking in Singapore, right? Will it be kind of like worse in that sense because it is to buy luxury? It's much more easier.
Yeah, because they are more affluent.
Yes, and the whole place is a city, right? It's not like here. Maybe someone can just hide in some more rural area and say, "Hey, I'm just gonna hang out at the teh tarik store nearby." Like I was in Gua Musang for one trip. They were saying that there's nothing to spend money. I just go out, have a teh tarik with someone.
The peer pressure in Singapore is different.
So how is it different from Malaysia? If you have known any local Malaysian friends who actually grew up here and sharing stories.
Well, I think I'm not sure whether all bank people will buy Rolex after 1 year. Yeah, but I think there is the culture of like, I need to look good to impress other people, especially in that field, right? So like, for example, you spend money to earn money, and one of the ways is to look good. So in a way, it's like the culture, it can be quite superficial sometimes, especially in those fields. But I think there's also a counterculture movement in Singapore where people are like, why spend so much money for what? Nowadays, you have like, there's this weird thing that I observe on social media that the very wealthy people will flex that they are taking public transport.
Oh.
Yeah, it's a reverse psychology.
flex.
Yeah, so maybe like the new rich, they will flex like their bags, their new car, but like the
really rich people.
the rich people, they're like, they wear like shorts and stuff. Then they were like, they enjoy like a simple kopitiam meal.
And any politicians do that as sort of like to show that they're qingming, to show that they are
Wow.
very
Okay, I know for sure no politician in Singapore will do like the
the Rolex
the
one.
Rolex one. I think that one confirm
out
jialat.
lah.
Yeah.
I think I would think that would be like the natural slant that I mean to appeal like
to look more normal, to appeal
Exactly.
to the masses
To the common
and
man.
things
Yeah,
like that.
I think so.
Yeah, so I actually, one of the reasons why the rat race has become what it has become in Singapore, to a greater degree compared to other countries, is that, in the Singapore context, political leaders have said, look, we need to be competitive.
Yeah.
We need to, make sure that we can survive in this very competitive world.
Yeah.
And that's why we need to work hard. We need to make sure that we are ahead of the game. Do you find that to be a narrative that is very hard to go against in the Singapore context because of all this exposure, right? From
Government also expect you to work hard. It's very hard to just say I want to chill.
Yeah, I think maybe, I'm not sure about the times before I was born, because I was born in 1989. But I think in recent years, it's more about not so much about working hard, it's about going up the value chain. And if I watch old LKY videos, I mean, he has always, LKY is Lee Kuan Yew, right? He has always focused on productivity. I think Singaporeans will need to be one of the most productive people in the world if we want to enjoy our current standard of living.
Yep.
I mean, I've been to Vietnam, Malaysia, Indonesia recently. The young professionals are quickly catching up with Singaporeans in terms of skills. So obviously, if you want to continue to have your nice Sing dollar, your nice, you buy an iPhone every year, then you will need to upskill. I think the real question Singaporeans need to ask themselves, do I really need that new iPhone every year? If you can say, no, I don't need the latest stuff. I don't need to fly expensive airline. I don't need to go to Japan twice a year. Then it will be easy.
skiing holiday.
To go Niseko. Then you all won't need to be so productive. But if you all want to continue all these luxuries, then it gotta come from somewhere, right? Then that's why you gotta be productive. Your ability to earn money is why you can have all these nice things. Then you just let go of these nice things, then life doesn't need to be so hard. But in many ways, because Singapore has no natural resources, we will need to use money to kind of compensate for that. I think we realized this during COVID, right? When we had to, find new ways to import food. There was a chicken ban to Singapore for a while.
That one, bad public policy on Malaysia's part, but we saved that for another conversation.
I mean, all these things take money, right? To import to import eggs, from somewhere across the world to ensure
Your
that
beef from Brazil or
exactly.
Argentina.
All these take money. Diversification costs money. And I think if Singaporeans realize that so a lot of Singaporeans say I'm okay with earning less money, but I'm not sure whether in practice, are they really okay?
I think as long as the basic provisions are within reach, in that, I know within my lifetime, when I'm still relatively young, starting a family, I can get a successful HDB ballot to be able to buy a HDB unit for less than $1 million Sing dollars, and to be able to access public transportation, and maybe aspirational one family, working family, both husband and wife can have a car.
Wow.
Right? Something like that.
Wow.
Do you think it's realistic?
I don't think it's realistic.
Okay, why?
Yeah, I think Singapore has quite a lot of challenges ahead of it. One of it is first of all, maybe let's settle the car thing first.
Okay.
If everyone drives, right, it's just bad for the city.
Okay.
I think I said in the previous podcast, I think cars are meant for intercity transportation. Within the city, things like public transport or even micro mobility stuff like bicycles, PMDs, personal mobility device, e-scooters, they might actually work better because cities cannot be congested, adds to pollution. So I think that is a bad idea. So I think for car, that is more or less settled.
That's a very woke way of thinking. But there are also some gaps in Singapore because on e-scooters and other PMDs, sometimes the Land Transport Authority, our equivalent of JPJ, they are maybe a little bit conservative.
That's
Of
right,
course,
that's
of course. So I'm actually on the Active Mobility Advisory Panel.
Okay.
Yeah, so it will take time. Nothing gets built within.
Sure.
Rome wasn't built in a day.
Correct.
When it comes to stuff like getting HDB, having it affordable, I think possible because government owns a lot of the land. But sometimes because Singapore is such a small country, it does come with some trade-offs. For example, a couple of years ago, Singaporeans protested the removal of a forest because they didn't want to build HDBs there. So when many people have diverse views, it can prevent new public housing from being built which will in turn affect like
supply,
Yeah,
and
supply
then,
and demand.
and then the cost as well.
yeah, exactly.
Yeah. So actually, Singapore, because of the limited land and also the importance of forward planning, there are some initiatives whereby some parts of golf courses are converted into public
yes.
housing.
Yeah.
They're doing that in Hong Kong as well. And more recently, my former school, Raffles Junior College in Mount Sinai, that's next to the old train tracks, it was announced that it was going to be demolished, and public housing, mixed development would replace that area. So that's a good way of utilizing those spaces
I mean,
to increase supply.
Yeah, but it's also a big problem of like aging population that Singapore will have, right? Now the TFR I think is 0.9, total fertility rate is 0.97. So we're not even producing enough people to replace ourselves.
But you got very good import policy. You can import people.
Of course. Okay.
That's what's happening.
Of course, but when
Malaysia
immigration
also
happens,
going down, but not importing.
when immigration happens, like frictions are bound to occur also lah. And also, I think that is something that Singaporeans will also have to deal with in the future, right?
Yeah.
Because usually when they import like people who are more productive. Because why would you import people less productive than current people? The problem is that when you do that, stuff like income inequality happens. Some groups, Singapore might move forward, but not all Singaporeans might move forward at the same time.
Yes.
So there will be groups of people who find public housing, even subsidized public housing affordable. And Singapore's real challenge is to keep that inclusive for everyone.
Yeah.
And it's about finding ways to uplift the bottom 20%, bottom 30% of the population. And it's not an easy thing to do.
Yeah. But I think that's somewhere that Singapore has did rather well over the years, because if you look at the same condition of a different nation, would be like, for example, Hong Kong, where I think the people are less taken care of. For example, I think one good example is really about housing, right?
Yes.
Singapore is one place where property is upfront, is not for you to invest. It's for living in that sense.
For HDB, that I think is the narrative.
Yeah.
For private housing, I think that's
private housing is different.
So I think even on HDB, like in recent years, there's a lot of like discontentment. Because of now HDBs are allowed to be sold as a private asset. So on the free market, right?
after a certain time.
After 5 years. So in recent years, even HDB meant to be affordable pricing have seen prices like
That's right.
all the way past $1 million. So I think that has made it quite unaffordable. So but I think like what the government often says is that HDBs, right, have like a huge range of prices. It could be anything from the low, maybe nowadays like 400K, all the way up to, I think the record was $1.4 million.
Your executive HDB unit.
So it's all about like choosing the HDB that is within your means. And also if someone sells for 1.4 million, you have the freedom not to buy it.
That's right.
Right. But of course, I think in recent years, like the government is also trying to make sure that HDBs are not perceived as unfair also, because there are these HDBs in prime locations that people get them at a subsidized price, and then they wait 5 years and they sell them for a lot of money on the open market.
Like in Tanjong Pagar, is it?
Yeah, exactly. And they call it like the lottery effect. So I think one National Day rally ago, I think then PM Lee Hsien Loong set out ways to kind of like address that as well. So I think public housing in Singapore is good, but it's definitely not perfect. A lot of people are unhappy with it. Not most people, like a significant number of people. But they are working to plug the gaps, which is you have to give them due credit for.
And I think this is a good time for us to take a break. And when we come back, we're going to talk about the challenges that the new Prime Minister of Singapore, Lawrence Wong, will face and is facing in terms of trying to manage all of these kinds of expectations. Be right back. Hey guys, welcome back with our special guest, Rui Ming from the Woke Salaryman. So recently, you have a new Prime Minister. This doesn't happen that often in the Singapore context. This is your fourth Prime Minister. We've had 10. So, new Prime Minister Lawrence Wong, from an outside perspective, his background in some ways is a bit different from previous Prime Ministers, but in some ways similar to many of his cabinet colleagues. So, different in the sense that He's from a humble background. His mother was a teacher. So from your perspective, right, how do you think he's going to cope with the pressures of dealing with the different expectations, especially among the younger Singaporeans who are feeling a lot of these kinds of financial pressures that you're very familiar with?
Well, I think like the main bugbear that young people will have with like the Singapore government right now will be housing prices.
Okay.
Because of COVID, housing prices skyrocketed, even from HDB. I think what the government doing now is that they're trying to like roll out like huge numbers of like BTOs to hit the market to increase. Like that's the only real way to kind of like solve the problem long term. So if I'm not wrong, like over 100k BTO flats are meant to hit Singapore in. I think this is an old figure. I remember I had a dialogue with Minister Desmond back 2 years ago. Now some of them should be out already.
And also trying to dampen speculation, having very high stamp duties, especially on private transactions.
Cooling measures. I think now like for ABSD for foreigners in Singapore, it's up to 60%, which is literally like, wow, please don't buy here anymore.
Correct. Well, but of course, there are some people who still can afford it.
I mean, there'll still be. But I mean,
That's true.
if it's like more money for government coffers, like I think for 60%, people still want to spend, then just let them spend. But I think another thing that will be challenging for this new government, I mean not just the PM, is that as Singapore society becomes more educated and more affluent, I think people will start to want more freedoms. The challenge is that many people want different type of freedoms. For example, young people want HDB eligibility to be lowered, from 35 to a lower age. Existing homeowners want like HDB prices to remain high because they count on it for their retirement.
And they also want the upgrades to come.
Yeah.
Exactly. So I mean, not just housing. When it comes to like social issues as well, like large source of the population remain conservative. Youth are a very important part of Singapore, but I think if you look at the stats, they are like less than 30% of the population. So I think the new government will have to find out how to marry all these like
Balance.
all these diverse views. I think in the past, it was more like I say you do, right? In LKY's time, even up to Goh Chok Tong's time, the government say you just follow. Now I think as people become more educated, they want to have a say in policy making. But when different people want different things, it can be hard to run a country. I think we often sing praises of diversity, rightly, but also diversity can make it hard to govern a country properly.
Okay, so maybe I can zero in on one particular aspect of trying to manage those expectations.
Yep.
I think, the younger generation want to see politicians in Singapore have greater empathy for their challenges, right? Because, not everybody is a SAF or a PSC scholar, from top JCs, scoring all straight A's for your A-levels and then going to Cambridge or Harvard, and then coming back having high-flying jobs, even if, let's say, there are cabinet ministers of that profile, I think people want them to be able to understand what is it like for me who go to the hawker centre to go and eat and all that kind of stuff, right? Do you think this new government under PM Lawrence, they have those kind of empathetic qualities?
Yeah, so I think PM Wong is quite new to government, but I think I've seen like them signaling that they're trying to be open to more forms of success, which I really welcome because I think a couple of years ago, like a few ministers, someone said something in parliament and our minister like disagreed. And then he said, must be from a lousy school. And from like a layman, that was really disappointing to hear. I felt like, wow, like at 50 years old, we are still talking about what school people come from. As someone who didn't come from from any like branded school, I felt that was really quite disappointing.
Yeah.
But I think the new government has kind of like signaled that it will offer like alternative paths to success. Not just go to like the standard field schools and then you have like some magical path in MNC or the government.
Sure.
But of course, whether or not that happens, only time will tell. But I think right now many people look at, like say, how government hires people, and they see like government still pays degree and diploma holders differently, and many people use that as a way to say like, nothing is changing. But of course, on the ground it's easier to say than do lah. So I think even that you have to give some time for the government to adjust and see how things play out in the long run. Because I think many times policy can only change so many things. Many times about like having the people buy into it. For example, I think there are certain ministers that are quite capable, but they speak like not so polished, not so eloquent, and then the people will say stuff like, you'll be very lousy if you represent Singapore. Right.
This is the communications part, right?
Yes.
Yeah. But then some people can be like, and then other people, maybe they're very eloquent, but they are from branded school. So society has to realize like, okay, not everyone just because, eloquent from branded school means you are capable. I think legislation or government can only do so much. The people must buy into the vision also. If not, it's just a pointless exercise.
Yeah.
You want to ask about the...
Yeah. So with so many different challenges as a new government, right? I think one thing I do observe is that in Singapore, it seems like the government does put a little bit more effort in terms of trying to communicate their efforts to public. I mean, as compared with Malaysia, my main gripe with Malaysian government from last time until today is always about communication. So for you yourself, right, as a citizen of Singapore, how do you feel the government actually communicate like what are the changes and challenges? Like even I see when the new Prime Minister Lawrence Wong, even before he became the Prime Minister, it was kind of like communicated to the public that like, oh, this is a suitable candidate to be Prime Minister. Malaysia until today, I still do not know who's going to replace our PM one day. Yeah, but in Singapore, it's kind of like everything is communicated. So what does the Singapore government do so differently to communicate all these things to you?
Well, I think the answer is a monopoly on power, right? Because when you are in power for a long time, you can plan these things. I mean, this is not like saying whether good or bad or not. But I think results-wise, the government,
you can't deny that,
the monopoly has served Singapore well for at least like the last 6 decades.
Right.
So I think without like consistent government, sometimes it can be very hard to plan long term. Right, because sometimes in other countries, governments change because of like less benign situations, right?
Yes.
Sometimes it's a coup, sometimes there's like an entire takeover, and then people are left with like new projects like just thrown to them.
Sometimes the Sheraton move, but, it's okay, yeah.
Yeah, okay, I can't comment on that.
Yes.
Yeah, then when it comes to continuity, I think that's one of the benefits like the Singapore government has, like long-term planning.
Yeah.
Of course, in the future, I think probably Singapore will have a credible opposition party at some point. And I think, in fact, like the PAP government does welcome it, because if you want to have it's better to have like a credible opposition
And a responsible one.
exactly, versus one that is grouping lah. Yeah. Like better than having like a strange opposition or even grouping within like the party itself.
So that's for the area of continuity, right? Like for example, let's say not so much about long term, and stuff like that, but rather like let's say Singapore to increase their GST, which happened recently. I do see, because I follow your comic strips, right? Then I noticed that there's a lot of effort to actually inform the people about it, to tell the people how is it going to be implemented and so on. Can you share with us like...
And just to add to that, I think there's also, I think probably in more recent times, an active effort by different ministries to engage with people like you guys and others who are in the ecosystem that do not belong to the government, but have creative products to offer to communicate government policies in ways that are accessible to the public. So can you share your experience on that?
Yeah, so I think back when I started my advertising career in 2014, I think like stuff was still quite top down. But I think as the internet flourished and people realized like, social media, internet is here to stay, the government actually embraced alternative form of communication. I think in the past it could rely on traditional media such as like TV or state newspapers. But I think in recent years, they also realized like, okay, the audience is going somewhere, like where can we go to kind of capture their attention? And to that end, they have been very, very progressive in doing that lah. When it comes to communicating, I think it's very important because ultimately, even though it's a monopoly, Singapore is a democracy, right? And it's important for the people to actually understand what is happening in the country. Therefore, then they can best vote to give the next government their mandate. And I think like it's also reflected in the fact that people is probably Singapore's only resource. So communication can be seen as a way to educate the voter base to be as informed as they can. I think what we do not want is democracy that votes based on like fake news, based on rumors, based on popularities. I think in some regimes around the world, you vote for people just because they are famous.
Or maybe they have certain populist policies that may not be sustainable in the long term.
Exactly. So it's important, I mean, that's my own point of view. It's important for people to actually understand that, then they can actually make a more informed decision. Of course, when it comes down to different voters, what is good for them might not be good for another voter.
Okay, so let me put you on the spot here. Since we talked about communication.
Sure.
When it comes to public communications, whether it's in the form of speeches or in the form of social media outreach, who do you think are the more effective politicians in Singapore in this space? Can be from government, can be from opposition.
I think Lawrence Wong is definitely up there. Old classic Lee Hsien Loong. Of the new
That you
cabinet,
are familiar with? Yeah.
I would say like Ong Yi Kang. Yeah.
Your health minister?
Yeah. He has done some very
Very on point social media
I would say
posting.
avant-garde content, right? Obviously as a politician, I'm sure you know, like making social media content, there will be hits and misses, right? I think they've done relatively well so far, but I think like if they are, social media is a double-edged sword. If you're not careful, you could be one step away from like a cancellation or losing support.
Yes.
So as a social media professional, I would say like, even for politicians, like we must tread very carefully. Yeah.
And you think are there enough politicians in Singapore that tries to maybe be a bit more creative in terms of the way they communicate and also the content that they communicate? Are there some?
Yeah.
Other than Yi Kang?
Wow. I think this is hard. I think like someone like Senior Minister of State Baey Yam Keng. Yeah, so he's
the Tampines GRC.
Yeah, Tampines GRC.
Yes.
Yeah, I
I've
think
gone running with him before.
yeah, I think he's quite creative. But I think overall, like most ministers in general, like you need to be there. You need to have a social media presence. Although I think it's very easy to overdo it.
Sure.
Yeah, if you talk about yourself too much, people also get sian of you. So in a way, I'm curious to see like what this new dimension of leadership. Because in the past, if it's just for example, when it was Lee Kuan Yew's time, he just say he don't need to appeal to the masses that much. I think these days, I guess I'm just concerned, in some aspects, like people become more influencers than politicians.
Sure. So like for me, again as an outsider, but with some knowledge about the Singapore ecosystem, and I draw it back to public policy.
Sure.
I really appreciate, for example, your Minister for National Development,
Desmond Lee.
Desmond Lee, who the way he communicates about public policies that is under his ministry, whether it's on public housing, HDB, an important part, whether it's on things like the National Park Service with all the park connectors and the new things that they've done, including on the whole railway to Tanjung Pagar. So I think that kind of effective communication is good because it communicates the implications and the
trade-offs,
results, results and also trade-off of public policies. When he talks about needing to build some sort of a wall on the East Coast, to prevent erosion and things like that. So that's one example. Another example would be an opposition MP, James Lim. The way he communicates his own, perception as an economist and trained economist in terms of the impact of different public policies, tax policies, economic development policies on different parts of society. Done very measured. And also
true. I've seen that. And he has a new book out recently as well, right? Southeast Asian economies.
Yes.
I can put it here if you want.
To full disclosure, I went to school with the both of them.
Oh, okay. Nice.
One was my classmate. And then the other one was in the same cohort as me. And I still keep in touch with the both of them. I won't mention which one is my classmate, which one is my cohort mate. But I think those two are good examples of responsible politicians communicating public policies in effective and responsible ways.
I will say sometimes the desire to chase views can be very, very appealing, right? So, and often like the serious stuff won't attract as much eyeballs. But I think there's still a need to put out the serious stuff. Even as content creators, we know that, right?
Yeah.
Sometimes like the fluffy stuff does well.
Yes.
When we talk about really hard topics like macro topics, like why is there taxes? Why inflation happens? People don't listen. So,
which is why we need content creators like us to be able to explain these things to the man on the street.
Yep.
Right?
Yeah, true.
In Malaysia and also in Singapore.
Yeah.
Right.
I think this is one industry that's I would say that it's getting more and more attention.
Yeah. And maybe just a final segue on this part. I noticed that even in social media, there are different voices emerging in Singapore. So you have a website portal like Mothership, for example, that gives quite interesting coverage. And then you have a couple of podcasts that have come out that are a little bit more cutting edge.
Yep.
Trying to provoke conversations and
Sure.
whatnot. Do you think that there will be more of this kind of discourse, under Prime Minister Lawrence, and because of some of the demands of the younger generation and of society in Singapore that you talked about just now?
Well, I definitely think so, because I mean, nowadays people are getting more and more vocal, and I think also there's the perception that the new government is more willing to engage with people, right? And I think perhaps that will lead to more conversations. So I think that's definitely possible.
One example of how I think a public policy was not communicated well in Singapore, and I'd like to hear your opinions
Sure.
on this. Was this whole thing called SimplyGo?
Oh yes, I know of it.
So this was a big issue in Singapore
Yep.
because the policy, and correct me if I'm wrong here, was basically one where the government tried to force everyone to use the app on the phone instead of the equivalent of the touch and go card. Right. So a lot of people were saying that, I actually can't see my balance. Some of the older people found it a little bit tricky to use, and then the government had to
U-turn.
make a U-turn.
Yep.
How did you see that debate taking place in the larger media landscape?
Wow. How? Sorry, let me think. The debate as in.
Okay, so the debate on the SimplyGo rollout that was
okay.
very unpopular.
Sure.
Yeah.
I think most people were unhappy because they felt like when they interview a guy, I don't name the guy, right? The person said like the people planning trusted the system, so and they don't really care for how much the thing costs. And I think that raised like a huge furor.
Yes.
Because how could because it shows like the people who planning it are out of touch. Right. Yeah, and maybe that is true to a certain degree. Maybe they should have consulted people more. But I also felt like the courage for the government to do a U-turn might not be something that they did, let's just say like
In the past,
in the past. Yeah, so if anything, I felt like, they listen to feedback. It's an unfortunate mistake, and maybe it'll be a lesson to future public servants to do more like sentiment testing. Yeah, but I think overall it's not bad lah. Like
At least they listened, at least they responded.
yeah,
And I think this is the part where I emphasized earlier. The empathy part in being able to feel the pain of the
Yep.
people that were affected by this in a negative way. And then at the same time, how far does the empathy go in terms of actually doing things like testing the system, getting feedback before you implement the system? And this requires some level of going down to the ground, understanding what public transport actually means and how it feels when you do it, which is what I think Anthony Loke does, the Minister of Transport here in Malaysia. He takes the MRT, the LRT bus, just to experience it for himself.
Spot check. He always do that.
And maybe it's something that is an example that maybe some Singaporean politicians will also follow.
yeah. I like what I say, because like empathy really cut both ways, right? The politicians have to understand the public, and public also have to understand the government.
Sure.
If the public doesn't understand like the ways policies are crafted or what it's meant to achieve, they might vote for someone else.
Sure.
And I think ultimately like you accept the government you think you deserve. You will vote and then you get a government that is reflective of what society thinks. Because like democracy in some sense is the market.
Yeah, but I think here, having been a frontline politician, I would say that it is the responsibility is much more on the government side to explain because of the complexity of the issues, and for the government to understand rather than the other way around, because the public, it's a very wide variety.
So
of
the
people.
government need to explain simply and effectively, and then the public needs to make a best decision based on what information they get.
Which is a good way for us to do a plug for ourselves, in terms of our content creation, and also the plug for your book.
Oh, wow.
Which is The Woke Salaryman, Crash Course on Capitalism and Money, Lessons from the World's Most Expensive City. So maybe as a final plug, when was this published and where can people buy this?
Yeah, so I think we published this in March this year, and you can find it in Malaysia in Kino and also Popular.
Okay.
Yeah.
And in Singapore?
In Singapore, it's in also Kino and Popular, but also there are some smaller bookstores that I feel very bad because I cannot name on the top of my head.
And can you buy this online as
Yeah,
well?
I can also buy it on Amazon and I think Shopee as well.
And in Malaysia, do you know how much it sells for?
I think it's 100 plus ringgit.
110.
Yeah,
Okay.
110
In Singapore,
ringgit.
it's
In Singapore, it's $33, I think. And then if you buy on Amazon SG, I think sometimes they have a discount until like $26.
okay. Yep. So interesting pricing models in different countries.
Yep.
And if you want to sort of like understand this, and I'm sure it'll more than pay for itself because of the financial wisdom you'll get from this.
Yep.
Look for Crash Course on Capitalism and Money from the Woke Salaryman, and you can follow the Woke Salaryman on Instagram as well. So follow Rui Ming on Instagram if you want to look at his cycling journeys and other interesting
And
things.
soon
that he
diving.
does.
Yes, and soon diving.
Any last words that you want to share with the Malaysian audience and maybe even some Singaporeans who are tuning in?
Well, I have enjoyed dancing on the line on, being entertaining and getting cancelled for the past hour.
I think you're okay. I think you've been okay.
I hope I've done okay. If there's any feedback, feel free to DM our page. I've tried my best and I have no regrets. Thank you.
Thank you, Rui Ming, and we will see you in the next episode of the Are We Okay podcast.
See you guys.